Alright guys, welcome back to PAULY'S Auto. This is going to be part 3 to that 2014 Chevy Equinox with the CAN bus problem. So, that being said, let's get right into the wiring diagram and start mapping out this circuit so that you guys can understand how these things talk to one another. So, first thing we're going to do is we're going to cover a quick down and dirty on how the CAN high and low work together, just so we have an understanding, and then we'll start drawing this out. So, something to think about, and if you're not familiar with CAN high and CAN low and the high-speed network and how it works, you're going to have a CAN high, which will be labeled on here as, if you look here, it'll say, hopefully this zooms, high-speed GM LAN serial data bus, and you'll see a positive and a negative. Now the positive is our high, and the negative is our low. So what we're expecting to see on the scope is we're expecting to see on our high 2.5 volts to 3.75 volt signal, and then on the low we're expecting to see a 2.5 volt to 1.25 volt signal. And this is not the greatest of drawings, but you'll get the concept. And if you're not familiar with what these signals would look like on a scope, there's plenty of videos out there, plenty of guys out there talking about this stuff. You can check them out. Do a lot more research. I'm just going to give you down and dirty. Now, if you look at my first video, you'll see that I'm tied in to the steering angle sensor, and on my scope you'll see that signal. But it'll look like this, somewhat like this, and your high will be high from this voltage range to this voltage range, and your low will be from that voltage range to that voltage range, and they'll mirror one another, guys. They'll mirror one another, and you got to look at a lot of known goods to know what good looks like, and you got to look at some bads to know what bad looks like. So really, it just comes down to experience and doing this stuff. So that's what we're expecting to see. One of the things that I think kind of confuses a lot of people, I know it did for me when I was first doing this stuff, and to be honest with you, I'm still not an expert at it. I'm still learning, but CAN high and CAN low, you'll see that there are always going to be two. Okay, there'll be a CAN high and a CAN low that are going to go from module to module, and it's important to think of this as a highway or a two-way street. Okay, so you'll have that connection from module to module. So for example, our steering angle sensor, we have a CAN high and CAN low, and if you follow the two up, they come up and they go in to our electronic brake control module. Now that's a two-way street, meaning the EBCM can talk to the steering angle sensor, and the steering angle sensor can talk back. Now when you're looking at the pattern on the scope, knowing who's talking to who is, I'm going to be honest with you, I have no idea who's talking to who. So one of the biggest struggles we run into is okay, well, who's sending what and who's sending the signal? And the only way to really know is to disconnect and eliminate one of the modules, and then look at the signal. And if the signal's still there, well, then obviously that's coming from the other module. And then we would have to tie into and the problem with, what I'm trying to say is, the problem with disconnecting these modules is that you have to remember that if you disconnect its connector, okay, and if you look on the diagram, you'll see the dotted line around the module. Well, that means that that's a partial view of all the wiring that goes into it. If you look, if you look on the actual connector, a lot of times there's other wires, powers and grounds, and so on and so forth, that go into that connector. So when you disconnect it, you're basically shutting it down, or could be shutting it down. So that's very important to remember, that you're not going to get a signal out of something if it has no power and ground. It can't, or an enable signal, okay? So again, what we're looking for is that signal, and like I had said in the first video, kind of to get your direction, you want to pick where you're going to go to test. Now you could go to the DLC. You can see the DLC here. Its CAN high and CAN low is tied in right here, and this goes off to another diagram. I probably should have printed it, but I didn't. But I know this goes to the DLC, and this is where my scan tool is sending out its signal to ping and get signal back from all these modules, okay? And that's how they communicate. Data packets, okay? Ones and zeros, the binary. How that all works in its depth, really don't matter. I just know that I know what I'm looking for, and that's all that matters. So what I do is I go through, I pick a module. So like, let's say I start at the steering wheel angle sensor, because that's where I want to go test. And I find all my CAN highs, okay? All my high-speed GM LAN serial data positives. And I just start highlighting, guys. I start highlighting where all those go from module to module. And what you need to remember is when you start mapping this out is, okay, if you look, this one comes up and over, and right there are two numbers. There's a 1 and there is a 2. I know it's hard to see, but right here's a little key. And this is important. You need to know what you have, okay? Do you have an all-wheel drive system? Do you have a front-wheel drive system? Do you have OnStar? Do you not have OnStar? Because, and of course I put X's next to the ones that this particular vehicle had, because where this is important is when you start mapping it out, you can see that it comes up to this little bracket here. And what this is telling you is that if, let's say for instance, you have option 2, which is front wheel drive, this wiring is going to go this way and into our multi-axis acceleration sensor, okay? Versus going this way for an all-wheel drive model, which goes up and over and into our rear differential clutch module. Okay, so it's important to understand that a front-wheel drive is not going to have a rear diff module, okay? Doesn't need a rear differential, it's front-wheel drive. So, same with OnStar. You can see from our rear diff module, it comes, the high speed is coming out, and it's going into this one, or correction, over to here, to this bracket, okay? And over here we have they call it the Telematics Communication Interface Control Module. Now, whether or not this is a factor is going to depend on whether or not you have OnStar, okay? So, I'm not trying to beat this too much because it just gets too confusing, but it's important for you to read the diagrams correctly, and it's important for you to understand that these things mean stuff, okay? 1s and 2. You know, which system do I have, okay? You have to know that stuff, guys. You have to know that before you can properly map this out. So, enough of that. What I wanted to do was kind of show you how I map things out, and what I do, like I said, is I go module. I start at a module, and I just get all the highs, and you can see I have all the high-speed data lines mapped out based on my options of this vehicle. And now I know the highway, okay? I know how the highway intersects and how it communicates from module to module, okay? So, the next thing I want to show you is once I've done that, and as you get more experience with wiring diagrams, you'll get better at this. I like to draw it out quickly, and I don't draw out both the high and the low, because I'm telling you, you're always going to have two on the high-speed network. You're always going to have the high, and you're always going to have the low. So I draw them as just one line going from module to module so that I can get a good picture, clear, simple, in my head of how these things are interconnected. So here's what I did, and this is going to be pretty crude, but I just took what I have here and I simplified it into something my brain can understand. And this helps me kind of get an idea of how they're talking. So if we look, let's start with the electronic brake control module. All right, here is our data link connector. This is where our scan tool is tied in to the CAN high and low. And again, these are drawn single wire, but there is two wires here, a high and a low. So you got to picture this as two different wires. But I don't care because I know that there's going to be two coming down from, so starting here, electronic brake control module, there's two wires basically. Two of them are going to split off, the high and the low, to the DLC because it's tied in here. Every model's different. But if you look and you follow this down, it comes into our steering angle sensor, okay, module or whatever. Now, on my first video, when I was checking the CAN high and low, what I had done is I had gone to this steering angle sensor and I had disconnected it and its connection here. and I back probed on my high and my low with 2 different scope leads. So scope number 1, good pattern. And that was coming, that signal or that communication you were looking at initially was coming right from the EBCM, okay? Right here. It's coming right from it, right to the steering angle sensor. Now it's important to remember that the steering angle sensor will send information back along this data line back up to the EBCM. It's a two-way street. So they're talking back and forth, sending data packets to one another. And that's how they talk. Now, if you look at the wiring diagram, okay, I drew it out further because there was 2 high and low cans coming out of my steering angle sensor and up and over to the diff module, okay, based on my option. And this is, again, a two-way street. So the diff module and the steering angle sensor talk to one another over this high-speed CAN, okay? They're reporting back and forth what's going on. From the diff module, I had 2 that came out, and they went over to our multi-axis sensor, okay? And remember, multi-axis sensor and the steering angle sensor are the 2 that I'm concerned about. So the multi-axis sensor is sending signal back and forth, talking back and forth with this diff module. Now the diff module has multiple cans. You'll see 2 that come off and they go to a terminating resistor. And every CAN bus network will have 2 terminating resistors, both 60 ohms each. And in this case, the diff module has one of the terminating resistors in its, and it actually comes with the harness. We'll get to that later, but there is that. So if you're ever wondering what a terminating resistor is, that's what it is. And all that does is it cleans up the signal and helps keep the data packets, the signal that you're seeing on the scope nice and clean and whatnot. But anyways, there's 2 that run off to that. Then there's another 2 that run up and over to the body control module. So the body control module and the diff module share information. All of this is interconnected. Then our body control module also talks back and forth with our electronic brake control module, okay? Our electronic brake control module talks back and forth with the power steering module, okay? So there's data lines here that talk back and forth. The power steering module talks back and forth with the transmission control module. And the transmission control module talks back and forth with the ECM, or the engine computer. So this is a simple, drawn-out highway as to how all the communication takes place, okay? Now, what's important to think about here is think about the fact that we were tied in with our scan tool to at the DLC. We're hooked up. We're basically pinging all the modules, okay? We're sending a signal out on our scan tool requesting information and wanting to know what is being reported. And that's how we get our data. That's how everything comes to our scan tool, okay? So what's important to remember is in order for us to talk, which we were not able to the multi-axis sensor, let's start with him. We were not able to talk with this module, okay? Now, how does this module get its signal from here all the way up to the DLC? That's a good question. It can only go one way from the multi-axis sensor, and that's up and through our diff module. Okay, because it talks on this high-speed CAN into the diff module, and the diff module sends information back out, down and through our steering angle sensor module. So it talks and it relays information through the steering angle sensor module, and then the steering angle sensor module relays that information back up into our scan tool and to our electronic brake control module. I know that's confusing because you may look at it and be like, well, how do you know it doesn't go up to the BCM? I don't. I mean, it could very well be sending information for the multi-axis sensor up and through the BCM and from the BCM to the EBCM. Okay, it really... You just gotta, that's why it's important to draw the whole thing out, okay? Because we might have to test in multiple spots to find our issue. Now, like I said, I wanted to go to the two that weren't talking. The easiest one to get to was the steering angle sensor, okay? So what I did is I disconnected the steering angle sensor and I back probed the connector side, not the module side, the connector side coming from the EBCM, okay? I back probed right here and I noticed that I had a good CAN bus, a good waveform there. So I'm like, okay, that's not my issue. So now let's go up to the other two. And again, there's two here coming from the EBCM, pins 1 and 3, and 2 and 4 here are coming from the diff module, okay? So then I'm on pins 2 and 4 with scope number 2 pattern. And this is the pattern that was erratic, okay? Remember, it didn't look like a normal CAN bus. That was where my issue was. Okay, great. Now I've got some direction. Now I know that my issue is from here to here, okay? So there's a problem. What do I do next? And that's a good question. Well, I could disconnect my rear diff module and recheck my signal here. And that's exactly what I did. But once I did that, I had no signal on X411 at all. Nothing. A dead pattern, okay? So that tells me that I obviously have to get creative to find my issue. So that's where the connector X411 comes in, all right? Now, I couldn't go to the multi-axis sensor, so I don't know if the multi-axis sensor is sending information that's all skewed to my diff module, causing this signal to look all jacked up. I had no clue. So what do I do next? Well, I look at my wiring diagram, and I look at my steering angle sensor, or correction, my multi-axis sensor, and I say, okay, I can't go here because this is under the center console. But if I look here, and on the diagram, you can see these two little double parentheses. That's a connector, and they're labeled K and J, and that is X411. Okay? Now, it's important to remember when you're looking at this that X411... Sorry, guys. I got interrupted by my daughter. But anyways, where was I? Oh, so it's important to remember on the connector X411 that J and K basically means that those two are those are the pins labeled for these wires, okay? So there are multiple wires going to X411, and if I look at my diagram, I found X411 here labeled C. So where that wire there says serial data comm enable. Now I want to talk about serial data comm enable, and I will here in a second, but let's find the rest of X411. X411. And you can see there, come on, zoom, D and E, okay? And there's my high-speed CAN. So you can see that the steering wheel angle sensor signal going from the differential to our steering angle sensor, that there is a connector, X411, that these two wires go into. The multi-axis acceleration sensor also goes into that connector, and there's also this wire here, X411. Now this is important to remember, guys. Your first thought is well, let's just go to X411, disconnect it, boom, you eliminate the multi-axis sensor and test here and you're good to go, right? Wrong, because now you're disconnected here, okay? You're not, it's no different than when I disconnected the diff module, all right? This may be confusing, and I apologize, but you got to bear with me. So the other thing to consider is if I disconnect X411, I've disconnected its serial data communication enable signal. And this wakes up the diff module and says, hey, start talking, pal. Tell us what's going on. This is something that I'm not going to cover too heavily, but it goes to all the modules, okay, that need to be woken up in order for communication to start taking place. All right? So, disconnecting X411 is not going to be an option here, okay? Remember, I'm back probed in on pins 4 and 2 with my scope, and that's where my erratic signal is. And I want to eliminate my multi-axis sensor from the equation, and I want to know if my signal cleans up once I disconnect it, okay? I can't go into the center console because I'm not doing that. So I want to go to X411, And what I want to do is I want to depin, and that's exactly what I did. I want to depin these two, and that'll eliminate my multi-axis sensor, okay? It'll eliminate it from the network. So, looking up on ProDemand, I found connector X411, and that's a whole separate issue, video, guys, on how to look up your pinouts and all that stuff. But I found the connector, I found the two wires on the connector, I located the connector, I depinned them, and rechecked my signal at pins 4 and 2, and my signal was still erratic. My signal was still erratic with this guy disconnected. So what does that mean? That means that I'm going after the rear diff module now. Either I have a problem in these two wires right here. Again, if you look at my simply drawn out one, I depinned, let me grab a pen, I depinned this guy. So this guy's out of the equation now, but my pattern is still bad. It still doesn't look right. So my issue is in this wire. My issue is in this wire or this module. Now some of you might be thinking, well, how do you know the BCM isn't sending? I don't. I really don't. I'm just kind of going up the line, guys. So the next step, the next step was to, the next step in my video, I think at this point is when I found that TSB, okay? I found the TSB telling me to inspect this harness here, and this is why I would have saved a lot of time if I would have went to that TSB right away. But let's say, for instance, you don't have a TSB. Okay, so where would be my next step? Well, my next step would probably, would be going to X411, okay, and probing in here, okay? I know that my steering angle sensor is disconnected. So we're disconnected here, we're back probed in here. We would move our scope leads to these two wires at X411 that go into the diff module from the steering angle sensor, and we would look at the pattern, okay? And if the pattern is still bad here, then I know my issue is in this wire here. So I've isolated, you know, obviously if it's bad here and here, okay, it doesn't necessarily mean it can't be like shorted here or something, but what I could do is I could just go right to my diff module, okay? I could go right here at my diff module and I could look at the signal coming out of the diff module. Now that's going to be tough to do because we can't disconnect the connector and look at it because we'll have no signal. So I guess what we could do is we could do an ohms check. We could ohm it. We could use an ohm meter here, put one lead there, and we could put one lead here with everything disconnected and ohm out these two wires individually, right? We could do the high speed or the high line and the low line and see what we got. And we would have found our issue with an ohm meter, okay? So that's kind of, I know it's probably not the greatest description of how to do this, but that's kind of in a nutshell how to pinpoint where the issue is. And I apologize, guys. I'm new to trying to teach this stuff, and it's tough for me to do. But that's really what you need to do. Okay, if the signal, let's say for instance you ohm these wires out, and everything checks out. These wires check out. Okay, so looking back at our diagram, let's say we checked these two wires going to the diff module from the steering angle sensor, and those wires check out good. What would be my next step? Well, I guess my next step would be to depin these two wires from the rear diff module connector, okay, and actually check the two pins here at the module to see what the signal looks like coming out of it, okay, without these wires in as a factor at all, okay? I guess that would be my next step. And if my signal's still erratic, then I would just keep moving up the line, okay? I would check powers and grounds at the diff module, make sure they're good. And if they're good, well then I want to check my CAN high and low coming from the BCM to the diff module, okay? And see what that looks like. If that looked normal, and I've checked powers and grounds, and I'm still getting an erratic signal out of this diff module, then I know this is my problem. The diff module has got to be faulty, because how else would the signal be coming out jacked up? Again, it could be coming from the multi-axis sensor, but we've eliminated him from the equation. So that's how you got to isolate these circuits, all right? Now, I hope that made sense. I know it's a lot to absorb, and trust me, it's confusing. And I didn't even touch on single line serial data communication or any of that. So I guess the takeaway from here is you have to get familiar with the system and doing these types of diagnostics. And the only way you're going to do that, honestly, is just by doing it. The more you do this stuff, the more you start to learn, the more you start to understand how things work. You know, and that's really the takeaway here. So, getting back to my process, if we look, we looked at the wiring diagram. We looked at the wiring diagram, right? And we got an idea of everything. We got an idea of how everything talks before we started testing the circuit. So that would be the next step. Test the circuit's signal integrity, which we did. Okay, which obviously we're going to start doing that once we understand how the diagram works. The next step would be develop additional testing to pinpoint, and that's what I was getting at. You know, do I need to keep moving up the line, okay, to find my issue? I'm not finding it here, so now I need to go here. And using common sense, like, okay, well, how do I get this isolated? How do I find my issue? You know, and that's really going to come down to situation and experience, okay? And the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. So you develop your initial testing, then you continue to develop additional testing to pinpoint your issue, okay? Then you want to inspect the area for the issue described in the TSB. Well, obviously, if you didn't have a TSB, you still want to do your inspection of the harness and stuff, okay? If you're having trouble finding the issue, do a thorough inspection, okay? But at least now you have isolated where the issue is, and you've got a general, you know where you need to be, okay? You have a good idea of where you need to be, and that's where you need to focus your attention on, okay, guys? Once you find and you've come to the conclusion and you've checked all the variables and you've checked the powers and grounds and you've made a determination as to what you have come to a conclusion of what the issue is, and you know, sometimes you're not 100%. I'm not going to lie to you. Let's say it was the diff module that you've come to the conclusion, hey, that diff module is faulty. I've checked powers and grounds. I've done wiggle tests. I've ohmed out all the wires. I've disconnected other modules to get them out of the equation, you know, so on and so forth. It's got to be a bad diff module. Okay, now we need to figure out, does that module need to be programmed? And if it does, do I have the capability to program it? You know, these are all things you have to think about when doing this stuff, okay? And like I said, comes with time, comes with experience. The next step on step 3 would be obviously repair it and replace it. So now in the case of this case study, we had harness damage from rodents, okay? And that harness, actually, was able to get the harness, or we were able to get the harness right from GM. It comes with the new terminating resistor. It's all the push pins, everything for that short run of harness going to the diff module from X411, believe it or not. It was like $130, I believe, for the harness right from GM. So we just did that rather than try to repair the wires that were damaged. And of course we could have, but you know, $130 for the harness. Better just to get the harness, okay? Nevertheless, that was the issue, guys. That was the issue. And then, of course, we want to confirm the repair and clear all the DTCs, right? So I hope that made sense. I know this video was lengthy, and I'm trying my best to give you guys as much insight into these issues as possible. So do your research. If you're still having trouble understanding how these systems work, trust me, it takes time. There's plenty of guys out there that talk about CAN bus. There's way more in-depth stuff, and you just got to keep doing research, keep educating yourself, and it'll all start to click slowly, and you're still going to run into issues where you're going to be confused. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope that was helpful. I apologize for the length, and hopefully I didn't miss anything. And hopefully you got something out of this. That's really what matters here. So that being said, please like or dislike the video. Tell me why. If you have anything to add, please add it in the comments below. Check out those links to those 2 guys I did in part 2, and were talked or mentioned. And what else was I going to tell you? Oh, please subscribe. If you like what I'm putting out, I'll try to do more of this. Again, my goal here in the future is to do alignment videos. I haven't quite figured out how I'm going to do that yet, but that's kind of my goal. So if you enjoy what you're seeing, please subscribe. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great week, and see you next time.